Sure. Maybe let's get started then.
Okay, good.
So 7, this is a new, I don't think we've seen any chapters like this one yet. This is probably more akin to Proverbs. Not that I've learned Proverbs in depth, but this is much more a series of better this than that, better this than that, because this is better than that, you know. So it's a whole new sort of tone, and lends itself to some very interesting things. So first verse, we're on, yeah, okay, Risa has it. Good. Chapter 7, verse 1. Pasuk Aleph, Tov Shem Mishem and Tov, V'yom Hamaves Miyom Hivaldo. So that's already a nice Jewish wordplay, a little bit. Tov Shem Mishem and Tov, right? Better to have a name than precious oil. Shame here, we use it the same way in Yiddish. Actually, they use it that it just literally just means name, but when you use it alone like that, it implies a good name, right? A good reputation. So better to have a good reputation, I would say, than riches, I guess, right? Shem and Tov, I think, is here a metaphor for riches. And then an interesting thing, but consistent with what we've been seeing in the last 2 chapters, that the day of death is better than the day of birth. Yeah, why might that be? Any thoughts on why day of death is better?
Well, there's the midrash about the boat that goes out to sea, and they celebrate when a boat arrives, not when a boat leaves.
Okay.
Of course, the journey has been completed, the boat is safe, and it's somewhat of a morbid and contradictory notion, but the idea that you've lived your life and it is over, but you lived it in a way that you could be proud. And ultimately, that's a very big thing, because all lives will end. And will they end well or not? Or will they end in disgrace? So it has that, there's a morbid element to it, but it's also very sincere. Like, have you fulfilled either your potential or the mitzvot? Period. Have you done with your life as you were commanded to do?
Good. Yeah, we have, I saw the Rashbam says after the day of death, you can no longer blemish your good name. So that's related to some of what you're saying. Hillel says in Pirkei Avos, don't trust yourself until the day of your death. Meaning up until the day of the death, you have opportunities to build a reputation, opportunities to do different things. And then once you get to that day of death, that's really when you have the summation of that. And I like this idea of the ship returning from its journey as well. Here comes Judy. Hello, Judy.
Also, in the first couplet,
Yeah.
there's the having your forehead rubbed with oil
Okay.
is a real symbol of the good life in the Jewish idiom that we're using. Like
Nice.
royal is how you're crowned, and also it seems to be a way of celebration. People would actually anoint themselves. Oil was a perfume. So it here, instead of all the the singers and dancers and vineyards and everything, it really is saying that this is better than that. This is better than all those material things, is to have integrity. And I'm not sure Kohelet has really said that yet. He's hinted at it, but
Okay.
I'm not sure he's really said integrity trumps the riches of this world. And I think he is saying that here.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. It's interesting also because if anointing oil, if they used to anoint for crowning and for things like that, that's related to reputation. That's related to a shem tov. And so here, I wonder if there's also a little bit this idea of, like, in the same way that the prophets admonish us that, like, the intent behind the sacrifices is more important than just empty sacrifices. Here, more than just the outward appearance of authority or of good reputation is actual substantive stuff as well. So that's a nice connection to Shemin as anointing oil, but also, again, yeah, he's denounced. I mean, he's talked about how you can't take the wealth with you, but here we do finally see him saying that it's better to be a good person, essentially, better to have a wholesome attitude, approach to life. So Judy, just to catch you up, we're in chapter 7, first verse. So, so
Okay,
good.
thanks. Yeah.
So good. So
Yeah.
we felt better a good reputation than fine oil, and better the day of death than the day of birth. Says Shlomo in verse 2, or Judy, did you have something to say on that?
No.
Okay, great. No problem. Says verse 2, Tov lo leches el beis Avel, mi leches el beis Mishte, ba'asher husov kol ha'adam. Right? It's better to go to a house of mourning than it is to go to a house of feasting, because Ba'asher husov kol ha'adam, because every person is going to die, right? That's the end of everyone, of every person. Ve'achai yitain alibo, and the living will take it to heart, right? So this, I think, this is were the Stoics into this, maybe memento mori, I think they call it in Latin, just like having reminders of our mortality. The sages, the Chazal, get into it. This is something that maybe I'll talk about more just as we get towards the end of Kohelet. But one of the things that I've been enjoying a lot about Kohelet is that it does feel to me like a bridge between biblical stuff and rabbinic stuff, because it's clearly part of the Bible and really of that world. But there is a lot in here. I think a lot of I mean, if you approach this all from a traditional perspective, then there's no problems at all. And that is generally how I live my life. Um, but a lot of the scholars talk about the distinction between rabbinic Judaism and biblical Judaism, and that the rabbinic period really starts a new chapter of Judaism that isn't temple centric. It allows Judaism to be mobile and exist in diaspora, and those are important ideas. But to me, this is a wonderful example of, no matter how much you think the rabbis are or are not an innovation, it's clear that it's a chain. It's clear that there's direct succession, and that the rabbis didn't just pop out of nowhere, right? There's very rooted in very real ways in the Bible, which I believe anyway. But I think this is just a nice example of that. Why am I saying that? Because the rabbis also, the Chazal also. I mean, the idea, we break a glass at weddings, right? The main idea there is to not get too carried away with joy over here, because we have to remember that as long as the temple is destroyed, the world is broken, and we can't get too joyous. And that's related to mortality. There are other similar Gemaras that aren't about the glass at the wedding, but they would break other things at weddings, to sort of, again, to keep it celebratory but not out of hand. And all of that is related to remembering mortality. So remembering mortality is something that the Chazal really were into, and I think that's basically what he's saying here, right? If you go to a house of mourning, it's going to remind you that that's the end of all of us, and we should do our best to bring ourselves to a worthy place when that happens, right? Maybe we'll act better. I mean, the very traditional approach, the Rashbam gives a very religious approach to this, and it's fine, it's good. Focusing on death, you'll be slower to sin, right? If it discourages sin if we remember our death. That's a very religious approach to this. The Sforno says that a funeral reveals whether or not someone had a good name, right? Based on what people are saying at the funeral, based on who's at the funeral. And so what he's saying, what the Sforno says you're taking to heart is, oh, if I do well, if I live my life in the right kind of way, this is the kind of funeral I can have, or this is the kind of funeral I'll try to avoid, Good. Any thoughts on funerals, feasts?
Is,
Yeah.
it's not saying it, but there's the notion of like honoring the dead,
Okay.
so anyway, I mean, it's sort of implied that, I think,
Okay.
anyway.
That is an interesting thing, and it's interesting that he's not more explicit about that, because in some ways, visiting a house of mourning, there's a real mitzvah involved. Visiting a feast, there also often is, especially back in the day, right? What's a feast? It's a wedding, it's a bris, it is probably still something related to a feast, but you can have feasts for any old thing. A house of mourning, there's a very real mitzvah involved in doing that. So it's interesting that he doesn't really address that outright, but it's worth knowing. Okay, verse 3. Verse 3 says, Tov kas mischok. This is an interesting one. Ki v'roya ponim itav leiv. I don't know, how would you translate kas?
Frustration,
Okay.
turmoil, inner turmoil.
Vexation, frustration.
Is
Good.
kas anger?
So in plainer Hebrew, kas usually means anger. That's
Okay.
what's interesting about this to me, is that in a very plain Hebrew, this would mean anger. None of the translations I looked at translate it as anger. Judaism is generally very hesitant when it comes to anger, and we'll even see later in the chapter that he's hesitant about, he's not gung-ho about anger. So some interesting things about kas over here.
My translation says vexation.
Yeah, mine
Vexation.
as well.
Yeah, JPS says vexation. It was interesting. The JPS says vexation, and then in its note, it gave an interesting interpretation that is what ArtScroll ends up translating it as. So that's just a fun thing. But here's what that is. ArtScroll translates it as grief, that grief is better, and that actually makes sense with, that continues from this: better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, better to have grief than to have lightheartedness. Right. So the connection with grief, I wanted to share it because it's good scholarship. It's grounded in good Torah. All right. Again, it usually means anger. Vexation is related to anger, right? Frustration, stuff like that. But based on similar language in the book of Job, apparently in the book of Job, chapter 6, verse 2, it uses the same root. And there it's clear in that context that it means grief. So probably it means grief over here. ArtScroll translates it as grief. I think that might be what Rashi says as well. So grief is better than revelry or gaiety. And then for through a sad countenance, the heart is improved. What's going on there? A sad countenance, the heart is improved?
Well, I think thematically, this is saying that it's the dark side of life that illuminates,
Okay.
your real understanding. Like
Okay.
only through these experiences do you understand more. Do you think seriously? Do you encounter the sacred, encounter Hashem? And joyful occasions are dulling and escapist. And no one really is doing any thinking at a party. And this is not, Kohelet doesn't roll that way. He wants to bring you as close as possible to the essence of life's journey. So all of these are related to, in a sense that he's not just saying, oh, it's better to cry. He's saying crying will bring you to greater understanding, and that's what I think he's saying here. You will, again, understanding is enriching, even if it's understanding of something sad. At least you've separated from dullness and vacuity and just know nothingness.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I think that's the deeper meaning. I want to add Rashi because it's also just a good religious word, but I like what you're saying, Ethan. But Rashi says that a scowl may provide needed, like if you're going around with a scowling face, it might give people the rebuke that they need to change from their ways. So that a rotten face like that can bring the heart more correction, which is a nice religious word as well. But I like what you're saying, Ethan, that like the willingness to any understanding that you get from the darkness of the world, that is it's gonna make you a deeper person. It's gonna give you a deeper understanding of the world around you. So that even if you're frowning because you're engaging with the sad parts of life, it's building character on a very simple level. It's building character. Okay. Verse 4. Verse 4, we've got Leiv Chachomim Beves Evel, right? We're still on this kick over here. Leiv Chachomim Beves Evel, the Leiv Ksilim Beves Simcha. Right? The hearts of the wise are in the house of mourning, and the hearts of the foolish are in the house of rejoicing. A nice, the JPS translated it in a way that I think is very nice. I like this lofty language of the hearts are in the house of this and that, but in a very simple way. The wise are always aware of death, and the fools are only thinking of fun, basically. The wise person always has an awareness of the coming death, and a fool loses sight of it. But again, it fits. If he's saying it's better to go to a house of mourning, that makes sense. He's going to say that the heart of a wise person is thinking about the house of mourning, is engaged in the house of mourning. Here lends a little credence to, I think, Rashi and the Rashbam, who are talking about rebuke and giving very religious, death keeps away from sin. Here's, I think, part of the context that leads them to saying that. Says verse 5, Tov lishmoa ga'aras chacham. It's better to listen, it's better to hear the rebuke of a chacham, of a wise person, meish shemea shir ksilin. Right? That's better than hearing the song of fools. Which again, rebuke is sort of ugly or intense, hard to hear. Reproof, that's better even than the beautiful singing, potentially, of a fool. Right, the singing of a fool is pretty, but it doesn't cut to the reality, is sort of what I'm thinking there. Says in verse 6, right, continuation of this thought, Ki kol hasirim tachas hasir kain schok haksil v'gam zehavel. So they point out that this is onomatopoeic a little bit. This sounds a little bit like what it is, right? Ki kol asirim tachas asir kain schok haksil. The verse is describing, right, that the voice of a fool is akin to the crackling of thorns under the teapot, right? If you're kindling a stove in the olden days with thorns, there's a lot of hissing, and there's a lot of crackling, and there's a lot of I guess what would be thought of traditionally as unpleasant sort of sounds and sputterings coming from the nettles and the thorns under your teapot. That's what the voice of a fool is like. And again, kechol asirim tachas asir, right? I think that's supposed to evoke the hissing and the popping of the thorns. Rashi adds an interesting thing, that when you burn thorns, there's no real, it doesn't give any substantial heat, right? I guess it's helpful for starting the fire, but you're not getting like a real substantive heat. You're getting like a little something that helps get you there, but it's not the real deal. V'gam ze havel. So now we're going to change directions a little bit. Thoughts or comments until this point?
The other thing I'll say is when he adds v'gam ze havel,
Yeah.
even this is vanity. It's vanity to think that you're superior and you're wise, and it's vanity to kind of have, these things are also fleeting. It's all what is fleeting. So even these are very small victories. And he just has to see, he has to throw that in. Like, you may be wise, you think you're wise. Well, that's also just a breath.
Good. One of my questions, whenever he says this, my question is always, is it a comment on what he just said? Like, he's saying that, like, oh, the voice of fools, it's like the sputtering on the tea kettles, and that's vanity. Or is it more like what you're saying, where it's going on the whole set of thoughts beforehand, right? Here's my take. It better to be wise, better to think about, better to go to the base Avel and all of that. But also all of this is fleeting, right? Gam ze havel, all of it is fleeting, right? And that's always my question when he inserts this.
Well, that's a good one.
No. Kiho Oshek says, verse 7, Kiho Oshek Yeholel Chacham the abe the slave matana. So this one's good. This one's got a few different approaches. So what is oshek? So oshek generally means oppression. So JPS wanted to translate this as like dishonesty. And I think that's a good one, right? Meaning if you're engaging in the form of oppression that is, right, on some level, if you're cheating someone out of something, that is some type of oppression. So they're using oshek as like dishonesty in business. So like if you're being dishonest, that will detract from your wisdom, that will destroy your wisdom. And gifts will lose the heart, right? The heart will be drawn after gifts, basically. It'll corrupt the heart, is what they say. I actually like translating it as oppression itself. What did I have written here? Yeah, so abuse of power neutralizes all wisdom that a person had. I forget where I saw that, but I saw that in commentary here, and I like that. I think a person can be very intelligent, can be very smart, can even be wise, but then if they get too caught up in their own power, it just cancels out the whatever benefit they had from being wise. It really sort of destroys that. And then I think it's more intuitive, the idea that like the heart is corrupted by gifts, right? Nothing wrong with giving a present on the holiday, but gifts are a way that in the Chumash, I mean, it says that judges can't accept gifts because you'll favor the person that gave you a gift. So that I think is pretty intuitive. Tov achris davar mereshiso, says verse 8, that the end of something is better than the beginning of something. Tov erech ruach migva ruach, and it's better to be patient of spirit than to be haughty of spirit. So there's two words, right? Davar. We have the word davar over here. Davar always means, it could mean a matter or it can mean a word, and there's approaches to both. So I think if we translate it as matter or thing, the end of a thing is better than the beginning of it. I think it's consistent with, it's very consistent with this idea that the day of death is better than the day of birth, right? We see something in its wholeness. We see something with its results. That's better than in the beginning when it's still not complete or when there's still a lot to go, right? There's also, we say, I assume it's a Gemara somewhere, but kol aschalos kashos, we say, right? Any kind of beginning is just difficult. So there's a lot going for something on its last day rather than its first day. But also Rashi and the Rashbam both read it as word. They read davar as word. So in that case, if you do that, tov achris davar merishiso is basically saying it's better to hear the whole phrase, the whole comment, right? It's better to basically sit and listen and wait for someone to finish their entire thought. That's better than just than not listening or not paying attention, right? Because once someone says their piece, then you know, oh, this is what they think, this is what their agenda is, right? You don't really get that until you actually hear the full statement. And that I think is more consistent with the rest of the verse that talks about being patient rather than being haughty or impatient. So I think both of those readings have strong merit, I think. Good. Okay, let's see a few more verses. Al Tivahel says, verse 9, Pasuk Tes, Al Tivahel beruchacha lichos, ki chas bechek kesilim yanuach. So here we have this word kas again. Here we have kas again. And here it might mean anger. I mean, vexation is a safe translation for both, right? Vexation is not as intense as actual anger. But here it definitely leans, rather than grief, it leans more vexation, it leans more anger. Right? ArtScroll translates it as, do not be hastily upset, for anger lingers in the bosom of fools. I forget where I saw it, but someone pointed out that it's not necessarily saying never get angry, right? It's not saying never get angry. There are other Jewish sources that almost say that, but this is not saying never get angry. It's saying don't be quick, don't be quick to it, right? And that it's a foolish thing. I think what it means that anger lingers in the bosom of fools. I think that just means that fools are quick, right? It's in the bosom. It's right there. It's ready to go. Um, so try not to get so angry so quick. Easier said than done, for sure. And also there's a million different personality types that relate to this differently. I'm reminded of Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos has four character types. Someone who's quick to anger but quick to be appeased, someone who's slow to anger, slow to be appeased, someone who's quick to anger and no, sorry, wait. Someone who is quick to anger but quick to be appeased. The gain is offset by the loss. Someone who's slow to anger and slow to appease. The loss is offset by the gain, something like that. And then you have the one who's quick to anger and slow to be appeased, and Pirkei Avos calls such person no good. And then you have the person who's slow to anger and quick to be appeased, and that's the righteous person. But okay, but so here again, here's an echo. Here's that continuation. Here's that chain from Sinai through Shlomo through to the Chazal. This is already evocative of approaches that we see in the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. I think we have time for maybe one more verse, and then just some parting thoughts. Al Taimar mehoya. Oh yeah, this is a good one. This is a good one. Al Taimar, don't say mehoya shehayamim harishonim hayu tovim me'ele. Don't say how could it be? What was it? What is it that caused the old days, the earlier days, to be better than these days? Ki lo mechachma sha'alta al zeh. Because it's not from wisdom that you're asking this, which is an interesting phrasing. Just two approaches that I saw to this two approaches that I saw. One, the more simple approach is it's saying don't assume that the old days were better, right? I think everyone at various points will reminisce about the olden days and things were better back then. Says Shlomo, don't get lost in thoughts like that. At the end of the day, you're not asking from wisdom when you're saying how could it be the old days were so good and these days are so bad, right? The old days had good and bad. These days have good and bad. Every days have good and bad. That's one that I struggle with because I've always been a historically minded person. So that approach is what it is, but I think there's a lot of depth to it because at the end of the day, it's easy to look back on the past with rose-colored glasses and to forget the problems that existed then. Also, but also what this also might be doing is this might be a continuation of the previous verse, where it's not necessarily saying don't get nostalgic, but it's more saying, right, in the same way that you shouldn't be quick to anger, don't be so quick to say, don't get so vexed so quickly that you're saying, how could it be? Yesterday was so good. How could it be that today is so bad? Right. It's more an extension of just that anger of just like, oh, how could today be so much worse? Rather than just saying don't be nostalgic. But good. I think we'll hold here in terms of verses. Any final thoughts, questions?
Well, I think 10 is a very psychologically acute understanding that, we are creatures that live in the past a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
the human mind is built dramatically on memory.
sure.
And I think this is a very curious thing is don't always think about how it used to be, whether it's in the grand sense of your society or in the very personal sense of yourself. Like,
Yeah.
and he's really dispensing kind of wisdom. Like that's not where it is. It's easy to look back and it's not wisdom to do that. It's just something that people do, but it's really kind of, nothing, Havel, it's really nothing of substance.
Yeah.
I also think I just had the notion that, the idea of being present and being in the present and doing, doing what's happening right in front of you instead of being obsessed with prior, what happened previously.
Good.
I mean, I get this sense that he he wants us to be active and working now, and that it's the stuff that we do now in the day to day, each day is what's important.
Yeah,
That there's a certain importance about that.
good.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
Thinking about what former times better than these is like it's fantasy.
Yeah.
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 I think it's very insightful, Judy, because in some ways you could read the whole book in that way, that he's saying, like, do this now, engage now.
Yeah.
This is what it's
Yeah.
all about.
I think that
It's
is I think that is a theme
immediacy
throughout.
to Kohelet
Yes.
that is
Yeah.
really almost one of the keys of the book.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. To stay here and now.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
good. Okay, thank
Good.
you.
Hey, Rabbi, thank
To be
you. Have a
continued.
great
Yeah.
night.
And catch you all soon.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Stay
good.
well. Have a good rest of your week.
Bye.